The 2026 World Cup was supposed to be the perfect showcase for football in North America, but this week, a very different story is playing out, one that has nothing to do with goals or tactics and everything to do with money, logistics, and three very different hosting experiences. While stadiums in the United States are dealing with cost overruns and growing frustration from local organizers, fans are saying something interesting is happening just across the borders in Mexico and Canada. Some are even suggesting those two countries are carrying the tournament that's facing real financial strain on the American side. So is the World Cup actually in trouble, or is this just the normal growing pains of the biggest tournament in football history? Let's break down what's really happening here. To understand this, you need to look at how this tournament is structured. For the first time ever, the tournament is split across three host nations, the United States, Mexico, and Canada, with 48 teams playing 104 matches across 16 stadiums. The United States is carrying the heaviest load, hosting the majority of matches, including the final, which means American cities are absorbing the bulk of the costs that come with staging an event this size. And those costs have turned out to be enormous. Reports suggest the 11 host cities in the U.S. are facing a combined shortfall of at least $250 million, largely because of how restrictive FIFA's commercial agreements are. Cities can't even strike basic sponsorship deals with local businesses if those deals overlap with FIFA's global partners, which has left some municipalities scrambling for funding in unusual places, including pitching local dry cleaners and auto shops for sponsorship money just to help cover expenses. Meanwhile, FIFA itself is on track to retain the overwhelming majority of the $11 to $14 billion this tournament is expected to generate. That gap between what FIFA keeps and what host cities are stuck covering is exactly where a lot of this tension is coming from. Here's where things get interesting. The financial strain on the American side isn't just affecting city budgets, it's affecting what fans actually experience on the ground. There have been real concerns raised about FanFest programming potentially being scaled back in some U.S. cities because of cost pressures, even though similar fan zones in Mexico are reportedly some of the most energetic of the entire tournament. Then there's transportation. Getting to matches in some American host cities has become its own controversy. Early reports around travel to MetLife Stadium in New Jersey suggested a single round-trip train fare could run as high as $150 compared to a normal fare of under $13, with special event buses pricing out around $80 on top of that. For fans traveling to multiple matches, those numbers add up fast. But that's only part of the story, because ticket pricing has become the loudest complaint of the entire tournament. When the joint North American bid was originally submitted to FIFA, proposed ticket prices ranged from around $20 for group matches up to roughly $1,500 for the final. Once tickets actually went on sale, the real numbers told a very different story. In Los Angeles, the average price for the cheapest available seats has been sitting above $1,000. In Miami, group stage tickets have been averaging around $900. Premium seating for the final at MetLife Stadium has been listed as high as $8,680, compared to roughly $1,600 for an equivalent seat at the previous World Cup in Qatar. Fan organizations across Europe have publicly criticized this pricing structure, with some groups calling it a betrayal of what the tournament is supposed to represent. And a few prominent football figures have even floated the idea of fans boycotting matches altogether over the cost. FIFA has pushed back against that narrative, pointing to record demand, sold-out matches, and the introduction of a small allotment of lower-priced tickets for official supporter groups.
This matters because it's creating a noticeable split in how fans are experiencing this World Cup depending on where they happen to be watching from. And this is different from previous tournaments, where the financial conversation was mostly about the host country's stadium investment, not a three-way split where the burden lands unevenly. The bigger issue is that the United States is hosting in venues originally designed for American football, massive stadiums like AT&T Stadium and MetLife Stadium that hold well over 80,000 people, far larger than the typical soccer-specific stadium capacity of around 60,000. Converting and operating venues at that scale comes with costs that smaller, soccer-built stadiums in Mexico simply don't carry in the same way. Meanwhile, fans on the ground are describing the atmosphere very differently depending on the country. In Mexico, association football is reported to be followed by more than 70% of the population, and that passion is showing up everywhere, from the energy inside stadiums in Mexico City and Guadalajara to the fan fests, which have been described as some of the liveliest of the entire tournament. Canada, hosting matches in Toronto and Vancouver, has leaned into a quieter but genuinely growing enthusiasm for the sport, with noticeably fewer of the cost controversies playing out south of the border. For traveling fans, that contrast is shaping real decisions. Some supporters are reportedly choosing to base parts of their trip around Mexican host cities specifically because the atmosphere feels more rooted in football tradition, and the costs around tickets and travel feel less inflated than in major American markets. What do you think? Does it matter to you which country you're watching matches in, or is the football itself enough regardless of the surrounding cost and logistics? So where does this go from here? FIFA has shown no signs of changing its commercial structure or ticket pricing mid-tournament, and given how far along we already are, a dramatic shift in policy seems unlikely. The more realistic scenario is that this remains an ongoing conversation throughout the rest of the tournament, with growing scrutiny on how host cities recover financially once the World Cup moves on. The best-case outcome for the U.S. host cities is that tourism spending and long-term infrastructure investment eventually offset the upfront shortfall, something FIFA and several economic analyses have pointed to as the long-term justification for hosting. The more difficult scenario is that some cities end up absorbing real financial losses that local governments have to account for long after the final whistle in July. For Mexico and Canada, the outlook looks comparatively stable, with fewer reports of the same scale of financial dispute, even as they handle their own logistical demands as co-hosts of a tournament this massive. So here's where this leaves us. This World Cup is genuinely historic in scale, but it's also exposing just how complicated it is to host a tournament this size across 3 different countries, with 3 very different economic realities. The United States is dealing with real cost pressure and pricing backlash, while Mexico and Canada are, by most fan accounts, delivering a smoother and more affordable experience on their end. Which country do you think benefits most from how this tournament is playing out, and would these cost concerns change how you'd plan a World Cup trip of your own? Let me know what you think down in the comments, and if you want more breakdowns like this as the tournament continues, go ahead and subscribe so you don't miss the next one. This story is still developing, and as always, football never stays quiet for long. See you in the next one.